Stop. Before you buy that monitor, watch this. Because the spec sheet is lying to you. Resolution, refresh rate, response time, panel types, HDR, color gamut, adaptive sync, ports, all of it. One video. No fluff, no benchmarks, no 40-minute deep dives. Just the key specs that actually decide whether your monitor is good or whether you wasted your money. Most people spend hours reading reviews and still pick the wrong one. You won't. Let's go.
First up, resolution. This is the one spec everyone talks about and half of people misunderstand. Resolution is just the number of pixels on your screen. 1080p means 1920 pixels wide and 1080 pixels tall. That's just over 2 million pixels total. 1440p jumps to about 3.7 million. 4K hits 8.3 million. More pixels means a sharper image, but only up to the point where your eyes can actually tell the difference at your normal sitting distance. If you're sitting 1 meter from a 27-inch monitor, 1440p and 4K start looking almost identical. Your eyes physically cannot resolve the difference. The people buying 4K monitors for a 24-inch screen sitting 2 feet away are essentially paying extra for pixels they cannot see. 1080p is fine up to 24 inches. 1440p is the sweet spot for 27 inches. 4K starts making real sense at 32 inches and above, or if you do professional photo and video work where you need pixel-level precision. Choose resolution based on screen size and use case, not because a bigger number feels better.
Next is refresh rate. Measured in hertz, this tells you how many times per second your monitor redraws the image. A 60 Hz monitor updates 60 times per second. A 144 Hz monitor updates 144 times. A 240 Hz monitor, you get the idea. The difference between 60 Hz and 144 Hz is immediately visible to almost everyone. Motion looks smoother, cursor movement feels tighter, and fast-moving content stops looking like a PowerPoint slideshow. The jump from 144 Hz to 244 Hz is real, but smaller. The jump from 240 Hz to 360 Hz is something only professional esports players with superhuman reaction times will notice. For most people, 144 Hz is the upgrade that changes everything. Anything above that is diminishing returns, unless you're competing at a high level. One important rule: your refresh rate is only as useful as your GPU can support. A 144 Hz monitor paired with a GPU pushing 60 frames per second is still a 60 Hz experience. The monitor can only show what the GPU sends it. Then we have response time. This is different from refresh rate, and people confuse them constantly. Response time measures how fast a single pixel can change from one color to another, measured in milliseconds. A 1 millisecond response time means the pixel switches almost instantly. A 5 millisecond response time means it takes slightly longer, which can cause motion blur or ghosting on fast-moving images. Lower is better, but marketing has made this complicated. Manufacturers measure response time in different ways. Some use gray to gray, some use black to white, some use best case overdrive settings that introduce inverse ghosting, which is its own kind of ugly. The honest answer is anything under 5 milliseconds is fine for most people. For competitive gaming, 1 millisecond panels are the target. But don't let a 1 millisecond claim on a box override everything else. A 1 millisecond VA panel with bad overdrive can still ghost worse than a well-tuned 4 millisecond IPS panel.
Moving on to panel type. TN panels are the oldest and fastest. 1 millisecond response times are common, and they're the cheapest to produce. The downside is washed out colors and viewing angles so narrow that tilting your head slightly makes the whole image shift. Competitive gamers love TN. Everyone else avoids it. VA panels have incredible contrast ratios, sometimes 3,000 to 1, which means blacks that are actually black, not dark gray pretending. Perfect for movies and dark-themed games. The weakness is motion blur on fast content and colors that are decent but not accurate enough for professional creative work. IPS is the all-rounder. Wide viewing angles, accurate colors, good brightness. Photographers, designers, and general users land here. The weakness used to be contrast. IPS blacks look slightly washed out, but modern IPS panels have improved significantly. OLED is the premium tier. No backlight. Every pixel generates its own light, which means when something is black on screen, that pixel is simply off. Perfect blacks, infinite contrast, colors that IPS cannot physically match. Response times under 0.1 milliseconds. The catch is burn-in risk from static images, lower peak brightness compared to high-end IPS in direct sunlight, and a price tag that will make you stare at the ceiling for a moment. Mini LED sits between IPS and OLED. It uses thousands of tiny LED dimming zones instead of one backlight, giving it dramatically better contrast than regular IPS without the burn-in risk of OLED. For HDR content specifically, Mini LED is an absolute win. Now, HDR, High Dynamic Range. This one is the most misunderstood spec on the entire monitor market, and the source of more buyer disappointment than anything else. HDR means the display can show a wider range between its darkest blacks and its brightest highlights. On a good HDR display, a candle flame in a dark scene looks like an actual point of light. Shadows have detail. Highlights don't blow out. The problem is that monitor manufacturers slap HDR labels on panels that cannot actually deliver a real HDR experience. HDR 400, the entry-level certification, just means the monitor hits 400 nits of peak brightness. That is not enough for a meaningful HDR image. HDR 600 is better. HDR 1000 and above is where HDR actually starts looking the way it was intended. On OLED and high-end mini LED panels, HDR is genuinely transformative. On a cheap IPS panel with an HDR 400 badge, it's essentially a marketing sticker. Check the certification number, not just the label. Next up, color gamut. This tells you what range of colors the monitor can actually reproduce. The standard for most content is sRGB, covering the color space used for web, streaming, and most games. A monitor that covers 99% or 100% sRGB is accurate for everyday use. Above that, you have DCI-P3, which is the standard used for cinema and professional video production. High-end monitors covering 95% or more of DCI-P3 will show colors in films and games the way creators actually intended. Adobe RGB is the standard for print and photography. If you're editing photos destined for print, Adobe RGB coverage matters. If you're just watching Netflix and playing games, sRGB coverage is all you need, and chasing DCI-P3 numbers is pointless. The key thing is coverage percentage and accuracy together. A monitor can cover a wide gamut but still be poorly calibrated. For serious creative work, look for factory calibrated panels, or calibrate it yourself. Then there's adaptive sync. Your GPU renders frames at a variable rate, sometimes 80, sometimes 110, sometimes 143 frames per second, depending on what's happening in the scene. A monitor without adaptive sync refreshes at a fixed rate, which means whenever the frame rate doesn't perfectly match the refresh rate, you get screen tearing, a horizontal split where two different frames appear on screen at the same time. Adaptive sync fixes this by letting the monitor dynamically match its refresh rate to whatever the GPU is outputting. NVIDIA's version is called G-Sync. AMD's version is called FreeSync. Most modern monitors support both under the VESA Adaptive Sync standard. For gaming, Adaptive Sync is one of those features that once you use it, going back feels broken. It eliminates tearing without the input lag penalty of VSync. If you're buying a gaming monitor in 2026 and it doesn't have Adaptive Sync, put it back on the shelf. Finally, ports and ergonomics. DisplayPort versus HDMI. DisplayPort is the correct answer for PC gaming. It supports higher refresh rates and resolutions than most HDMI versions, and it's the standard connection for G-Sync and FreeSync.
HDMI is fine for consoles and general use. For ergonomics, height adjustment, tilt, swivel, and pivot are not luxuries. Sitting at a monitor that's the wrong height for 8 hours does real damage. A monitor stand that adjusts properly is worth more than the difference between two otherwise identical panels. VESA mount compatibility means you can attach a third-party arm, which gives you full freedom to position the screen exactly where your neck needs it. So, that is every monitor spec. No fluff, no guesswork, just what actually matters when you're staring at a purchase page at midnight trying to figure out which one to buy. If you like tech explained this way, no jargon, no fluff, just straight to the point, subscribe. Hit like if this actually helped. And if you've got a topic you want explained the same way, drop it in the comments. See you in the next one.